In a three-layer architecture, the router layer is the first layer that contains the API routes of the application and is responsible for parsing and validating the payload of incoming requests sent by the client in order to strip them away from any HTTP-specific properties, forwarding the parsed data to the service layer responsible for handling the business logic of the application, and translating the result of the call made to the service layer into a valid HTTP response before sending it back to the client. When an incoming request reaches the server, it usually goes through several processing stages in the router layer before it is forwarded to the lower layers of the application and the response is sent back to the client. Here I say usually because in simpler cases, such as for the get-hello route that we've implemented in the previous lessons, the request doesn't need to be processed as it doesn't contain any additional data such as route parameters, query string parameters, or a message body. In that case, the request-response lifecycle can be illustrated by the following schema, where the client sends a request to an endpoint, the request is forwarded to the controller, and the controller sends a response back to the client. However, when the request does contain additional data, this data must be processed in several ways before it can be safely passed on to the service layer, as illustrated by the second schema, where the client sends a request to an endpoint. The request is forwarded to the parser in charge of converting its message body into a data object. The data object is then forwarded to the validator in charge of matching it against a schema to verify its properties and value types. Now, if the value doesn't match, the validator breaks the request-response cycle by sending an error response to the client. Otherwise, the data object is forwarded to the controller, and the controller sends a response to the client. So in the following lessons, you'll learn how to implement a health check route to enable external services to monitor the application status, a fallback route for processing unhandled requests, two authentication routes for login and sign-up requests, how to use middleware functions to parse the body of incoming HTTP requests, and finally create your own validation middleware for verifying the accuracy of the data sent by the client.